The Golden Egg by Pieter E Haumann. Friday. "Let's go!" shouted Annie as she flung her bedroom door open and charged down the corridor. Rufus, the Darvil feline, gave her a look of contempt before wrapping his bushy tail around his face to keep the light from his eyes. The rest of the house was still fast asleep, but soon appeared in the doorsteps as the girl skipped up and down the stairs, calling for her friends to come as quickly as possible. "Annie," said Robert as he wiped the sleep from his eyes, "the Easter egg hunt is only beginning at 8. "But if we get a head start, we'll get more eggs," she said, excitedly rubbing her hands together. "You do understand that the eggs are just for fun, right?" said Robert. "What do you mean?" said Annie skeptically. "The egg hunt is just for fun. We all share the candy afterwards," said Robert. One could excuse Annie for the misunderstanding. It wasn't exactly a tradition in their household to do a formal Easter egg hunt. Rather, Father and Mother would hide a few chocolate eggs around the house, normally in the most predictable of locations. Not this year, however. This year it was a grand affair. They spent nearly all of the previous day painting the eggs, and once they had all dried, Father and Mr. Darvil went about hiding said eggs, of which there must have been nearly a gross, all around Devil's Leap. It was bound to be quite the adventure to gather them all. "Don't worry," said Ellie, yawning widely. "You can have half of my share." Annie gave her a smile before she continued merrily down the stairs. "By the way," said Robert, after he had recovered from the shock of being so abruptly ripped from his slumber, "what are we going to do with all those eggs?" "That's the really fun part," said Anton, who appeared no better off than Robert did, as Butter and Peanut, the Darvil family dogs, came rushing from his bedroom and dashed down the stairs, no doubt to investigate what Annie was on about. "After we find all the eggs, well, most of the eggs, there's always one or two that are only discovered a few weeks later, and I can tell you, the smell of those things." "We were getting to the fun part," said Ellie, sensing her brother was about to venture off on a tangent. "Yes," said Anton, scratching his head right where a tuft of hair had curled itself up. "After we find all the eggs, we bring out Old Bertha." "What on earth is an Old Bertha?" asked Robert. "Old Bertha, as my brother calls it," said Ellie, "is a monstrosity of a cast iron pan." "It's huge," said Anton, stretching his arms as wide as he could. "I'll show you a little later." "And then we cook the eggs," said Robert. "Not just cook them," said Anton excitedly. "We make omelettes. Hundreds of egg omelettes." "Goodness," Robert exclaimed. "And just who's going to eat all of those omelettes?" "All of us," said Ellie, "and pretty much anybody in the area who wants to join in. It's kind of a local tradition, and we sell it by the plate to help raise funds for the local church. It's been going on since Lord Darvil's days. He founded the church, you know. And besides, it's more like an omelette pancake anyway, wrapped around grilled pork sausages and bacon." "Well then," said Robert, dreading the idea of having to cook up such a concoction, "I guess we'll have to get a move on if we want to find those eggs." "I found another one," said Annie, as she emerged from beneath an old plough which had been rusting away behind the old stables. She held the brightly coloured egg aloft and skipped towards the others. They each carried a basket filled to the brim with colourfully painted eggs. "How many more?" asked Toomey, who collapsed onto the lawn, joined swiftly by Butter and Peanut, who also had had enough of the scurrying about and snuggled up next to her. The morning had started off on a high note when they found the first egg hidden beneath a copper pot in the kitchen. They were soon joined by the Bellers, with Temba and Toomey having already found all the eggs Mr. Belle had hid around their house. "Surely this is all of them," said Ellie, as they laid their baskets down next to each other. "I am not counting those again," sighed Anton. They had been up ladders and down into holes all morning, and exhaustion was rearing its ugly head. Even Temba, who was never one to be outdone by either of the others, agreed that he too had had enough, and that a well-deserved break was in order. "I don't think we have to," said Robert, who had kept a tally of all the eggs in a notebook, including the time and location of each discovery. 143. "That's more than we set out to find," said Annie, victoriously, not appreciating the conundrum of returning with more than they had intended. "Maybe we found one or two of last year's batch," said Ellie. A cold shiver ran down his spine as the thought of what might be contained within the year-old eggs. "They all look fairly fresh, though," said Robert, as he stared at the piles of eggs. "In any case," replied Temba, "let's get these back to the house." As they made their way back to Darvil Manor, a bustling atmosphere filled the air. There were people chatting away happily, and the sounds of children running and playing on the lawn brought on a sense of excitement. There was a small line of people waiting to view the wondrous treasures that were contained in the museum behind Darvil Manor, none of which was more impressive than the Renaissance diamond, which the children had discovered during their first visit to Devil's Leap. The attention, however, was soon on the children, as the sight of them coming up the road carrying the large baskets of eggs brought on a series of cheers and applause. "You kids did it in record time this year," said Mrs. Darvil as she appeared from the kitchen, carrying a large tray stacked with breakfast sausages and rashers of bacon. "It's easy when you have your friends with you," said Anton. He remembered the debacle a few years back when Ellie was fighting a case of the flu and he had to carry the brunt of the hunting. It was pure torture. "We even found a few extras," said Annie proudly. "Extras?" exclaimed Mrs. Darvil. "What do you mean?" Robert took out his notepad and read aloud the number of eggs they had found. "It seems we had 3 more eggs than anticipated," he said. "Oh my," said Mother. "Do you think that there was any left over from last year?" "I'm not sure," Mrs. Darvil replied. "We normally do a proper tally of the eggs the kids find, and if there are any missing, we find them along the way. To be quite honest, Charlie doesn't put in the most effort in hiding these things." Annie scoffed at the idea that the eggs were easy to find. After all, she had clambered onto rooftops and burrowed into holes to get at all of them. There was even a pair of eggs that was hidden in a small hole under a rather sizable rock. "In any case," said Mother, "we should be careful not to allow any rotten eggs into the mix. You kids had better assist your fathers in breaking these eggs, one at a time into bowls to ensure that no rotten ones sneak through." There was a collective sigh and murmurings of protest, but their orders had been given, and a mountain of chocolate eggs and candy was at stake if they didn't comply. "This is going to take forever," moaned Annie, as she took the umpteenth egg from her basket. It had all become an automatic action by then, as she gripped it between her thumb and index finger, tapped it twice on the brim of the porcelain bowl, and dropped its contents into said bowl. "I agree," said Timber, who was just as annoyed at their current situation. He disliked the feeling of raw eggs, even at the best of times, but now he was all but covered in it. "We can switch if you want," shouted Robert, as he was enveloped by a cloud of bacon and sausage smoke rising from the large grills in front of them. Annie gave the situation one look, and decided that eggshells were by far the least bothersome of the chores. Their production line was quite effective, albeit repetitive. Annie, Toomey, Temba and Ellie were breaking eggs into small bowls to check their freshness before dumping them into the large container between them. Next to them stood Anton and Robert, who were tasked with broiling the thick bacon rashers and breakfast sausages, and next to them stood Father, Mr. Burley and Mr. Darvil, who were happily stoking one of their unruly fires beneath old Bertha, a 1.5 meter in diameter cast iron pan, which took all the boys and their father's effort to place on its enormous tripod stand. Following them were the mothers, who were busy preparing breakfast buns and sauces at the dishing up station, while being regaled by Dominee Malan, who led the local church and always made sure that he was seen wherever his flock was grazing. The conversation, however, soon turned to more serious matters, when Dominee told them that the church was experiencing dire financial troubles due to the recent drought and how much he appreciated their fundraising efforts. The festivities went by in the most organized fashion, save for 2 incidents where a rather dull-looking egg was cracked on a bowl and the smell of rotten eggs shot through the air. The mothers and Ellie would dash away from the tables, while the fathers made inappropriate jokes, which would cause the others to roll on the ground, clutching their bellies with laughter. Save for Robert, who immediately held his breath and took the egg to a hole they had dug in the backyard for just such an occasion. Butter and Peanut, thinking it was a snack-worthy treat, would immediately dash towards the hole, but upon sticking their noses inside said hole and discovering its contents, would dart away with a loud yelp or two. "I tell you what," said Annie, "I could murder one of those sausages right about now." The smell of smoked pork and processed cheese filled the air around them, and a collective rumbling of tummies started to spread around their station. "Me too," said Temba, who snuck Robert and Anton a quick peek, asking them to send some along as soon as it was done. "How about you, Toomey?" asked Ellie, but as soon as she turned around to see how the little girl was holding up, there was a loud shattering of porcelain, followed by a loud shriek from the girl. "What on earth was that?" exclaimed Anton as they dashed towards her. Her eyes the size of saucers, Toomey stood with one half of the bowl in one hand and a shiny egg in the other. It just broke," said Toomey, still in shock as a thin stream of blood ran down her index finger from where a porcelain shard had pierced the skin. "The egg is still intact," said Temba, as Ellie placed it onto the table to tend to the girl's wound. "Come," said Ellie, "let's get that cleaned up and find you a plaster." "This is quite peculiar," said Robert, as he reached for the egg. He lifted it up and raised his brow. "What's wrong?" said Anton. "It's heavy," Robert replied. He stared down at the yellowish-colored egg in his hand. "It seems like it's made from metal or something, maybe brass or copper." "A metallic egg!" exclaimed Annie. "I don't remember us painting a metal egg." "That's because this wasn't among the eggs we painted yesterday," said Temba. "I guess we found all the extra eggs then," said Anton, relieved that it wasn't another one of those rotten ones. It was mid-afternoon when the festivities finally mellowed down, and all that was left to do was the cleaning up and diving into some of that chocolate they had been promised. "Where's Robert?" asked Annie as she brought the final container of leftovers into the house. Temba and Anton were outside, using large brooms to try and clean old Bertha, and Tumi and Ellie were finishing up with the dishes. "I have no idea," said Ellie. "He was here just a few minutes ago." Annie placed the container down onto the kitchen table and headed out towards the foyer when she saw the door to the Darvil Manor library was open. This was a strange sight, and considering that it was always under lock and key right up to their last visit to Devil's Leap, quite peculiar indeed. "Are you dodging your chores?" said Annie sternly as she stood in the doorway to the library to see Robert at the reading table with a large leather-bound book open in front of him. It was the Darvil family ledger, and it contained the diaries of all the previous owners of Devil's Leap, all the way back to Lord Darvil, who had settled the farm more than a century ago. "Shush!" Robert ordered, as he held the metallic egg, which they had discovered earlier, up to the reading lamp. He had given it a thorough polishing, and finer details and markings seemed to appear as the lights seemed to dance across its surface. "Can you believe the trouble we went through to have a look at that book during our last visit?" said Annie, happily recounting the time she had clambered down the ivies on the side of the house and snuck into the library through the small window at the back of the room. "And here you are, leaving us to do all the work while you take a little break to do some reading." Robert barely noticed her approaching, and even when she had stuck her nose right in the book, he didn't so much as flinch. "This is remarkable," he whispered, as he compared the egg to an illustration contained in the book. Below the image was a series of numbers, organized in a table, and several drawings of an archer drawing his bow. "What is that?" asked Annie, as she nearly clambered onto her brother to get a better look. He pushed her away and placed a bookmark on the page he was reading. Robert remained silent for a moment, staring at the closed book, before drawing a deep breath and turning towards Annie. "It's gold," he whispered, his eyes wide open and shining excitedly. "What do you mean?" said Annie, as she stared at the shiny object Robert was holding out towards her. "I mean, this is gold. It's solid gold." "Amazing," whispered Ellie, as she held the golden egg in her hand. "And you're sure that this is the same one as in the book?" "Dead certain," said Robert proudly. "If you look at the bottom of the egg, you'll see a serial number and a small emblem of an archer." Ellie held the egg on its side, and right there, next to her finger, ran a series of numbers leading to the small emblem Robert mentioned. "Is that what the numbers in the book mean?" exclaimed Annie. "It is, yes," Robert replied, grinning excitedly. "Why are you so happy?" said Temba. "Because," Robert said, "there are more of these." "More?" Anton asked. "Where are they?" "I don't know," said Robert. "But in the ledger, Lord Darvil himself made a note of no fewer than 30 of these, which he had specially made." "But why would it just be lying around like that?" said Temba. "Do you think there are more of them hidden around the farm?" "If there are," said Anton, "I'm sure they won't be as easy to find as this one." Robert picked up the ledger in front of him and opened the page he had bookmarked earlier. They stared in amazement at the drawn picture of the egg and counted all the entries in the table below when Annie pointed towards an inscription at the bottom of the page. "What is that?" she asked. Robert held his finger under the inscription and read aloud, trying to figure out what it said. "It looks like a few letters, maybe an N and a T, followed by a series of numbers. 311 9-13. Yes, that's it. NT 311 9-13. "Is it the date?" asked Ellie. "Maybe it's a shipping number or something," said Temba. "I'm not sure," Robert replied, "but it's definitely a clue of some sorts." "Well, whatever it is," said Anton, "it must be important." "What are you kids up to?" came Mother's voice from the doorway. They shrieked. The mystery unfolding right before their eyes had them enthralled, and the sudden ripping back to reality sent their hearts racing for a second. "We're finding treasure," said Annie nonchalantly. "That's fun," replied Mother, halfway back towards the living room, before remembering that she had come looking for them to call them into the dining room to set the table. It was already dinner time, a fact that had remained largely unnoticed as they stood discussing the mysterious entry in the book and marveled at their stunning discovery.